Giving them everybody a minute. So let's get started. For the people who's not been following us in the CISO series, managing risks in Copilot for M365 for security and compliance is what we'll be discussing today. I am Adrian Becker, the CISO for Softworks, and hopefully what I'm going to do as well today is give you some practical advice, lay out where we are going with our CISO series and what the next steps will be moving forward around our CISO series. But the whole idea of today is very much to give you practical information regarding how we can manage risks in Copilot and leverage security and compliance for our organization. Just a couple of housekeeping items that I wanted to cover off very quickly is the session will be recorded, will definitely need to be recorded, otherwise everybody else registered won't be able to view it. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to type it into the Q&A panel at any time, and we'll try and address those at the end. Now, for today, we will be looking at organizations adopting Copilot for Microsoft 365. How do you prepare for security and compliance? What is queried? How do you deal with that? But more importantly, how are we going to be managing information and risks? And what tools do we have available to us from Microsoft? And then finally, how we can think about data governance. What tools are currently included in 365? Where are we as an organization with our governance? And what tools should I be using practically to look at some of the controls around governance when adopting Copilot for 365? And the good news is all of this can be dealt with and should be dealt with even if you are not leveraging Copilot, or even if you're not planning on leveraging Copilot, because hopefully what we'll be going through today is what I would call good housekeeping to keep that secure and compliant. Now, just before we start and get too excited, I wanted to give some hot off the press news since our last webinar, which is that Microsoft Security Copilot will be launching on April 1st. I initially thought it might be an early April Fool's joke, but apparently it's not. And at the moment, the view is that it will go into general availability on the 1st of April, which is very exciting and also very interesting, as there is still very limited information available. But for the people on the call who's not familiar with Security Copilot, it will very much improve the ability to investigate, respond, and understand if a threat is real with further forensic investigation to speed up security analysts' ability to investigate incidents. It will also leverage all of the signals from Defender, Sentinel, Entra, Intune, Purview, and you'll be able to ask those questions from Security Copilot. Based on all of that information, there's a couple of items that I would like to highlight what we know so far, because I think this is what is going to get interesting for us as we move forward is how does it work? How much does it cost? How much does it actually improve the security analysts' responses? And interestingly, Microsoft has already said in certain scenarios, it slows down their responses because they're waiting for feedback from Security Copilot, which can also slow down the process. So very much for all security personnel in the room, you need to think about how you're going to adopt it inside your environment. How is it going to benefit you, and how do I map that out for all of my users? As I said already, general availability is on the 1st of April 2024. I don't know who at Microsoft thought that was a good idea, but I can already see the April Fool's jokes flying around. The pricing will be $4 per security compute unit, and it is recommended that most organizations start with 3. Now, security compute unit is new, SCU. No idea how much it is. How long does it take for a security compute unit? But effectively, it will be costing $4 per security compute unit per hour. The whole idea at the moment is, depending on the number of queries you run, the complexity of the query, that is what will be consumed. And I've seen already, I work with a lot of the private forums, there's a lot of kickback at the moment, like how am I going to know how much it's going to cost us? How do I know how many compute units I need? And I think for Microsoft, we will see the pricing will improve, the calculators will get better as we move forward on a day-to-day basis. But the big challenge for us will be, how many do I need? How do I get the best answers out of it? And how is that consumed? And at the moment, it looks like Azure consumption, and it will also appears that from a consumption point of view, it will be rate limited, but depending on how many security compute units you run. But if you're using 3 full time and they charge you for every minute per year, that's $108,000. So I think there will be some significant improvement in how this is calculated on the consumption based. If we think about Copilot for Microsoft 365, it's a fixed price, but because security is so complex, got access to so much data, they have really changed the way that they work on this. So this is a brand new billing module. We will provide you more information, and we will most likely be covered during our next webinar or May webinar in more details, but we'll cover more of that moving forward. As we are talking about Copilot for Microsoft 365 and compliance, I just wanted to remind everybody what Copilot is. Copilot is the artificial assistant in the Microsoft tools for every user. It applies to the user, allowing them to use large language models in Excel, Word, PowerPoint, chat to help provide you with real-time information, improved responses with the data that you have access to. And everything that you ask, everything that you get back is the information that's inside your organization, and nobody's got our access to that information except the organization who has control around security and permissions. Now, from a point of view, I then get asked quite often, what information is actually queried? And just a reminder, and we did cover this previously, is Microsoft Copilot queries all of the information you have access to in OneDrive, SharePoint, Teams, email. All of that data is accessed, and practical examples, as I always say, I can go and ask what documents has my colleague worked on, and it will bring back the documents. I can ask for what information around those documents, give me more information, or I can ask for what resources do we have available. And provided I've got access, that information will be brought back to me. It does mean that if I want to share it, I need to ensure that the person or individuals I do share data with is got access to that information, else they won't be able to view it. But for a lot of organizations, Copilots initially sounds very scary, because the one that everybody thinks of is, what happens if it brings back payroll information? Well, you can probably bring back payroll information today. The user just hasn't tried. So be aware, all of the security, it's nothing new, it's nothing scary, it's just an easier way to ask for information that I already have access to. And for a lot of the organizations I've been dealing with over the last few weeks, they are a bit worried because they relied on what I would call security by obscurity, but that is changing as we move forward, and Copilot is being adopted. I'm seeing quite a lot of positive feedback from customers where they have identified use cases where it's starting to save them time, money on an ongoing basis. But that has brought a bit of a nightmare. Well, who is responsible for the security? Who is responsible for what we need to do? And I think what I wanted to cover off today is more around the AI security and shared responsibility models that everybody needs to be aware of. If we start off very simple, and I'm going to start with platform as a service, because that's where I see a lot of our customers are spending time, where they've created their own AI applications that they plug into their data, that they leverage to create applications, software, etc., to help use and leverage Microsoft's Open AI or Azure AI functionality. And what is interesting here is that Microsoft will take care of the platform, that is effectively the tuning, design, training, governance, data governance, etc. and then you can create your applications on an ongoing basis to improve your software and design your logic. But you have a responsibility to make sure that applications that you've designed keep the information safe, the platform that you're deploying these apps onto, web service, etc. You keep that safe, and you are responsible for that with Microsoft leveraging part of Azure. Now, if we come to Copilot, it's very different. Microsoft is taking care of the platform and the applications and has given you shared responsibility regarding the usage of Copilot. It means that a lot of the ethics, a lot of the controls that is built into is done by Microsoft using the ChatGPT engine, for example, or ChatGPT 4 that they're on at the moment. But learning from the data that you have in the environment, bringing back the information, running it through the Graph API to ensure that security is correct and on it. But that doesn't absolve the organization from the responsibility of running software as a service and Copilot. You are still responsible for training your users on how to use it. What do we expect you to do with the software? What type of questions do we want to ask? How should I use it best as I move forward? You're also responsible for dealing with the identity of who have access to the system. What information are they accessing? What's the security around that data? Have you labeled it? And also the governance regarding who's viewed the information, who should have viewed that information, who has it been shared with, how do I prevent data being lost? Because a lot of people, some of the questions I had was, well, can Copilot sort out my security for me? No, it cannot in the Copilot for Microsoft 365. It will tell you it's more of an assistant for the user. With Security Copilot, there may be more areas that we can leverage as we move forward to help us improve our security. But right now, I just wanted to be absolutely clear for the audience that's attending today that the usage of Copilot in your organization is shared responsibility, and you are responsible for the security, the governance, and training of your users. Microsoft will honor all of that. If they were to give access to data that you haven't shared with the individual, but that information gets back, yes, then Microsoft's got the liability or effectively has overshared information. But because they're running through the Graph API, which has been in use for a long time, from their point of view, the information is secure and nothing has changed in the environment except your data has been indexed and the users now have the ability to ask a question much easier. Now, with all of this, then bringing me back, great, we've got that shared responsibility, totally understand that. Well, how am I going to know that my data is secure? How will I be able to audit my Copilot usage? What can I do to avoid exposing my data? And where's my data being processed? And that is very important for organizations. So, for example, our group, nothing should leave the UK. The good news is Copilot is processing the information wherever you have your tenants subscribed to. So if I am based in, I don't know, one of the America, and you have geographically dispersed information that needs boundaries that you could put in place, that will be on it. Also, the data that I've got access to, if it's been labeled as internal confidential and I try and share it out externally, it won't allow me because guess what? It has been labeled as confidential internal. You can also currently go and run auditing, and I will touch on this in the next few slides. And then finally, you need to look at your permissions. If you're using SharePoint, how is that information shared? Is it controlled via groups? How often do you do group peer reviews? How often do you review the access to those groups? Same with Teams. If Teams responsibility is devolved, who is reviewing access to those Teams channels? Because once Copilot has been shared, and I'm part of that team, I've got access to that information. And what we see quite often is initially when this permissions is set up, that's done very well, but staff move departments, staff change job roles, and not always is the permissions taken away. The permissions are added, but not taken away. And it can mean that in my new role, I retrieve information or I leverage information that I shouldn't really be leveraging in my new role. So do think about what is your process, your procedures of removing information and dealing with users that changes roles. As I said, with Microsoft's approach to your privacy is you are in control, not Microsoft. You're in control of who's got access to what information. It's not Microsoft. They give you the tools, they give you the platform, but it's your decisions who you're going to give access to. Are you going to overshare information? How are you going to secure it? So, and also from your point of view, as I said, we'll look at your geographic locations. Protection is put in place, and it does depend which license you've put in that you've subscribed to, but the basic defenses are in there. But the in-depth security, the compliance, the data loss prevention still stays your responsibility in the organization. With this, then, Microsoft do a few areas and provide you with tools. You can look at the security and compliance centers in your environment, what security you have in place, what compliance you've got configured. You can also go and review the data usage and privacy policy, understand where Microsoft, how they've committed to responsible AI. Is it bulletproof? No, it's not. But more importantly is the fact that 365 policies and controls are enforced and honored. So think about data access and permissions. What roles do you want to configure? Have I used role-based access control? Who have I given the ability to add users, remove users from certain groups? If they are part of that group, how often is my access reviewed to that group? What information does those groups have access to? Also, how do I protect my customer data? Do I label my documents? Do I use Azure Information Protection to encrypt the data? But do think about all of these areas, but you are in control. And you'll hear me say this quite often as we go through these slides today, is you are in control. It's your responsibility to deal with these items on an ongoing basis. For organizations, as a quick reminder, Copilot as a minimum needs Office 365 E3 or Office 365 standard, but with Office 365 E3, you do get MFA with the basic security defaults included. You can do some manual sensitivity retention for content, but it only works in Office. For most organizations tend to use Business Premium or M365 E3, which will give you additional security, for example, conditional access, sense of where people can access data from. Also, how can I label documents? How can I encrypt documents? But again, it's very much manual processes, but it will also extend beyond Word, Excel, and include PDF, for example, and you can manage your endpoints. But if you really want to be in control, if you really want to leverage Purview, for example, to its full extent, guess what? Microsoft's not stupid. They have ensured that most of the best features are in their flagship product, M365 E5, which is over 40, I think it's 44, 45 pounds now a user at least, from a point of view, where you can do automatic sensitivity labels, set up retentions, see what content has been processed by Copilot, evaluate applications, do what I would call access reviews that you can automatically schedule into the environment. And we will touch on some of the features that's available from a security point of view as I move forward. But a lot of what you're looking for, if you're really serious, it is in the compliance section of M365 E5 to get that information. You can buy the individual packages, but it's just to be aware of it. For most organizations, you will get basic auditing. So that's a good news. So you can go and see which files have been previewed, what access. You can't necessarily see the query that I've run, but you can at least see what information or what files I have been brought back when I queried. I'll be honest, you probably want to set up your audit retention policy so you keep those that do have a history of what people have access to, but you need to be aware from your point of view, These are limited audit logs. They will be retained for a set period. And again, if you don't have the right license, and I do think this is, it will honor to the 30, 60, 90 day and the retention policies if you set up your own retention policy from a point of view. But if you really want to start understanding what you have, as I said, here's an example where we've got the auditing. You can't see a lot of information really. You can only see that I've used the chat application and I've had a query run. I can't get that information regarding what exactly did Adrian look for, what was the query, what information was brought back to me. All it says is, be aware that Adrian accessed resources. These are the 6 files I've accessed, and to bring back the information for the query that I did, but doesn't bring back the emails or anything else, so you know what information I was presented with. And for some organizations, that's good enough. I just want to know what Adrian did today, whereas for other organizations, well, I actually need to know what was the question that was asked. I need to know what information was presented. I need to really understand, did it deal with our governance and our compliance regarding our requirements. And I think this is where the nuances gets more difficult, is what governance do you require? What's nice to have, and what do you have a contractual obligation or legal obligation to have access to? As I mentioned, you can set up your communications compliance as well. So when I do search, I don't know, let's call it payroll, let's keep it simple, that you get notified, the compliance officer gets notified that Adrian has done a search for one of our categories that we want to be notified on. And you can extend that to, for example, if PII information was exposed, or if I've retrieved any data that we've classified as sensitive. You can set up those compliance and interaction with Copilot to bring back that information. You can then review the interactions and make a decision. You don't need to review every interaction, but you can say, I would want to sample 10%, or you can have in every interaction. But from your point of view, this is an E5 feature. You need to think about what communication, what interactions do I want to be notified with. It's no different from all of the other communications that you would want to detect in Exchange Teams, for example, if people are having communications with external parties or internally that you want to be notified. And that can be all sorts of information that I've seen this used for. You can use a pre-built-in categories, for example, credit card information. Have I asked for credit card information? What credit card information came back? Or, as I said, you can create your own custom search list for the keywords, etc. Let's say, for example, payroll, which is normally the one we see quite a lot of and what people are concerned with. Then, if you really want to get more understanding of what information I've accessed, what did I view, eDiscovery Premium at the moment is the best way to get that information out, to clearly see what was the question asked in either inside the application or what was asked of chat, and what information was brought back to me. You can then run for those searches, you can view that information, and you can take action. The good news is there is a audit trail every time somebody do a eDiscovery. But again, the premium version is only available as a standalone eDiscovery Premium or in your M365 E5 licensing, which is part of compliance. And I think this is where a lot of organizations are going to start struggling. You can get this information via eDiscovery standard. However, it is exported to a PST file, and good luck finding this information. It's a nightmare. I've tried a few times. You can probably, if with enough time, find it, but I can't see that you're going to find it quickly or easily. So from your point of view, think about how we're going to deal with the data, how we're going to get this information passed to us, and how do we move forward from a compliance point of view. For a lot of organizations, as they adopt Copilot, don't say that you need to upgrade to M365 E5, but you've got to identify the risk from your point of view. Now, I want to stop talking about Copilot because I think it's been a buzzword for everybody. Get me into Copilot. Let me have a look at, let me present the AI information. Artificial intelligence, information, risk is a job that we need to do and is the responsibility of everyone. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about how do we manage information risk in the organization and things to think about from your side. Risk is very much part of the management team. And what is the management team and the board's risk appetite and risk oversight that they will implement? You've got to understand what is our risk appetite, because at the end of the day, it comes down to risk versus cost most of the time. For some, even if it's a likelihood, how often what's the likelihood of it actually happening? So you want to understand that risk. You want to understand the organization's risk profile, and you then got to provide that leadership. What is our policy? What is our standards? What is our risk management process? What is our contractual obligations? And you need to make sure that what regulations do we have around our systems? What type of services are we providing? And understanding what our information risk profile is and how we're going to manage that will help us then deal with how we're going to do technical risk management inside the organization. And if I just continue here is because what you can then think about is what privacy and compliance regulations do I have to have configure? What purview configurations do I need to put in place? Is there any technical management monitoring that I need to have? And also, how am I going to secure my environment? As we always say, when you design any systems, any platform, any solution, it's got to be secure by design. But that means different things to different people. And for a lot of individuals that's joining organizations, new CISOs, a lot of it's already in place. So you got to actually think, how am I going to adapt and change my environment to meet these requirements, as we say. And then that is mapped across all of your people, applications, infrastructure, processes, etc. And we've got things to think about. When you think of people, the one that everybody always says the human is the weakest link. Well, yes, they are, but people aren't necessarily bad actors. It is just difficult these days. Systems are getting smarter. The criminals are getting smarter. The phishing used to be the easy one. These days, the phishing emails are getting better and better. They change it after they've delivered it in your environment. It's just getting harder. And I think for a lot of organizations, it's getting those tools, those processes in place. Yes, you still rely a little bit on the human, but you've got to have enough technical controls in to help them, but make them aware of the scams, what they've got to think about, what they've got to report back to you. But then also think about insider risk, because this is the one area that people tend to forget. We're also concentrating on the outside threat, but it's changing. Do you know what? Pay me a bribe, I'll go and install that piece of software on our systems. I will get this information we need. I will try and get these technical drawings or plans. That insider risk is absolutely critical to you, which then leads into how are we going to defend on our applications? What data security are we implementing? Let's think about that. Just enough information. Don't overshare. Don't over-permission any of your information. Think about what security we're going to implement. How are we securing our infrastructure? What network security? How have we designed it? How are we going to deal with our vulnerabilities that comes in on the day-to-day? And this is where IT operations spends a lot of their time and effort is how do I secure the infrastructure and the endpoint? And then you also got to start thinking about how am I going to deal with our operational security? How am I going to monitor what people have dealt with? Is the right individuals accessing the environment or is it not? And all of these IT operations and operational security all needs to work together when there's an incident, because I think this is what people forget. you will suffer an incident. And it's, do you have an incident management plan? How am I going to deal with the response? Am I familiar with what the risk scenarios is in our organization? What was the business impact regarding the incident? I mean, you can look at, I think everybody who watched the news, for the people watching the news, tanker's gone into a bridge. There's a major incident for them which probably wasn't planned for, had contingency, but I don't know how many people actually have planned for that particular risk. That will be very interesting. But that is exactly the same in the world of information security and IT. What are the risk scenarios? What's the likelihood? What's the impact on the organization? You need to be able to have your incident plans, your incident preparation ready, documented to deal with the unforeseen. Because if you've got robust process, policies, and plans, you can respond to these incidents no matter what they are. There's no way that you'll be able to plan for every incident, and everybody loves dealing with the most common ones, but it's the ones that you didn't foresee that's normally the one that will really cause the damage inside the organization. So have those plans in place. Think about how we're going to respond. And then you need to keep feeding that back to the leadership. Bring back the information. Educate your teams regarding what's happening. Also, think about, do we need to change our architecture? Technology changes, risk changes, threats changes on an ongoing basis. It's not just a fact that we've created the policy, we've created the process, and we're done. It's got to be constantly reviewed. Got to constantly reviewed. Why do we access the data? What information do we have? What new evolution have we had in the organization? Because most organizations these days are agile. They respond quickly to events. They need to respond to new opportunities, but also respond to threats. And it's our job as CISOs and as people responsible for the risk, compliance, and IT security to help the organization make those changes and keep them involved and keep them secure and provide them with the best advice and processes to help the organization deal with this. The good news, though, is Microsoft has a lot of these technologies in place to help you achieve all of this and from managing information and risk. It's quite a large subject, and for most organizations who already adopted the Microsoft license stack, you will be aware that this is available and has seen it. But for people who hasn't seen my favorite engagement, which is effectively the cyber reference architecture, this is the latest version. Microsoft provides you with a holistic view of securing your environment right from the endpoint. So literally deploying Defender for Endpoint or XDR, vulnerability management, explaining to you where you are, providing you with security inside your environment, with protecting your Azure environment, on-prem service, your identity, but also extending that into things like Purview, where you can start dealing with data governance, dealing with compliance, understanding what information we have, labeling that information, looking at what I've searched for in Copilot. But also then think about, how do I ensure that the individuals that's accessing that environment is monitored? Do they really have access? Have we given them the right amount of access inside the organization? Because I think this is one of the areas that I do see oversharing information, not really understanding what we have. The number of organizations who just lift and shift their file shares without actually thinking about the design of our SharePoint environment or our Teams environment. What is that information? What data am I going to be exposing to my users? What security do I have around my Teams, my OneDrive, my email? Have I implemented data loss prevention? All of that's available currently. And then also thinking about externally, what is my posture? Have I started looking at my secure score? Have I configured external attack surface management? A very, very cost-effective way of seeing what the outside world is seeing around your environment. Where is all of that information being fed into? For example, like Defender XDR. the new version that's just launched, portal, if you go to security.microsoft.com, there's attack paths included now. What new optimization can I have? Am I leveraging Sentinel? Am I leveraging the detection rules? What new information am I seeing? How am I feeding that back? How am I responding to those informations? And how do I constantly review my security posture and my security configurations? And there's been a couple of good articles by Microsoft security specialists at Microsoft where people think I configure Defender and once it's configured, I fire and forget. It's not the case. Microsoft is constantly expanding their capability, the solutions, what they include inside their environment. So as security professionals, you need to constantly review, am I getting the most out of my environment? Have I done all of the best practices? Is there new areas that I got to configure? When last have I reviewed my conditional access policy? When last have I tested my MDM, MAM policies, my conditional access? Because things change, changes are made, systems work, but it's a constant evolution. You should effectively run, like with your car, you run an MOT once a year on your car. Maybe you need to do the same in your Microsoft environment. And I would suggest even more regular than that, because there's so many changes and nobody can keep up with the number of security improvements that's happening and the size of the organization. So if I then run through very quickly some of the capabilities in each of the areas in the Microsoft solutions, and we will be exploring these moving forward in a significant more detail over the coming weeks and months. But you can think about what's in 4 distinct areas. What is my access control? And that is normally dealt with Entra, which is my Entra ID, which is my conditional access, my MFA, etc., Defender for identity, Defender for cloud apps, looking at Azure Firewall, and then also my endpoint management, Intune, Defender for endpoint. But these are areas that you can think about on a ongoing basis. And then what do I do from my security operations piece? I'm leveraging Defender XDR, but also you get Defender for endpoint, Defender for Office, Defender for identity, as we said. But then also think about my Azure environment or my AWS environment. Am I leveraging Defender for cloud? Which part of Defender for cloud? Because it's Defender for Server P1, Defender for Server P2, Defender for storage, etc. And there's about 14 different defenders. Where is that all going in? How am I going to be responding to those? Am I configuring my threat intelligence? Have I brought it into Sentinel? Is my Microsoft Sentinel environment optimized? Once you've got your base controls, we can then start looking at how am I going to be governing that information. And that will be, how do I deal with my posture? What is my secure score? How have I secured my information? Have I configured my external attack surface management? Am I using Purview? And I think this is an area where we see a lot more adoption currently on the market, where organizations would like to adopt Purview in more detail. How am I actually get started with my information protection? How do I go about labeling the information I have? How am I going to be dealing with the data loss prevention? Data loss prevention on the endpoint, on the internet, email. How do I get all of that? How do I deal with my insider risk management? And each of these areas that's in bold is a different product inside the Microsoft stack. And for a lot of organizations, they either own it or just need to go and tick the box to turn it on. But once it's turned on, how do I secure it? How do I manage it? And then we talked about asset protection. We talked about Defender for Cloud, I mentioned, but you can think about, am I using firewall protection, DDoS, my WAF? Am I leveraging backup site recovery? Is it immutable? When last have we tested our DR process? When last have we actually tested a restore of an environment? Because all of these security is there, is fantastic, but you always got to assume that you will get hit with a ransomware attack, assume that the attackers will get in. How do I prevent them from deleting all of our data? How do I Do I have a recovery? Have I actually tested it? And the amount of times I'm find the first time we go and test a customer's DR plan, it doesn't work. There's things that's been missed. There's areas that's not been documented properly. And I think you need to be aware, you need to ensure that you have tested it, documented it, keep it testing it every year, and also review what you're using. For example, I've seen a number of customers who goes, well, I don't need Office 365 backups, Microsoft backs it up. Yes, they keep the operational side backed up and functioning, but they do not protect against threat actors getting inside your environment, deleting your email. They don't, if you get hit with a ransomware attack that goes and encrypts all of your SharePoint or rename all of your SharePoint files or delete certain files or get access to remove the recycle bin, you are still responsible for backing up and protecting your information. And for some organizations, they just rely on their Microsoft security, but we see over 4,000 brute force attacks per second against Microsoft these days. The number of times that the accounts has been compromised, and all you need is one account that didn't have MFA turned on, and they will have access and compromising your environment. So think about this, and I know I'm going on about it, but it is absolutely critical. And what we will be doing over the next few weeks, and that will be coming out on in a poll, is we will be deep diving into Microsoft Purview, Microsoft Defender, Microsoft Defender XDR, EASM, Intune, etc., to help you deep dive to understand how you can improve your security, how you can improve your governance inside your organization with the licenses that you have access to. And I have also had a number of organizations goes, that's great, fantastic, but where do we start? And I always say, as I said effectively earlier, run a security assessment, understand what is your configuration around your Office 365, your Azure environment, and measure it against your CIS control. Get the executive report, get it back, help build the security roadmap. You need to be able to go and present that back to your management team to explain to them, this is our roadmap, this is our current security posture, and this is how I would like to introduce it and move forward. And it's not a single exercise, it's an ongoing exercise. And we've got customers who run the Microsoft security assessment every 3 months, and I've got customers who run it 6 months or annually. But as a minimum, you need to run a security assessment against your environment at least once a year, just to make sure nothing has been missed. And it's not to say that any person is incompetent or don't know what they're doing. It is just such a big subject. You do need that second pair of eyes or third pair of eyes to help you understand the risks and security inside your environment. There will be a link in the Q&A section, I believe, to this, or afterwards the team will send you a link to the security assessment if you want more information with sample reports. But this is where I want to end today because I'm conscious running out of time. We've covered a large area and we will continue our CISO series, as I said, covering either Purview, Defender, or Security Copilot. We are running, it depends how quickly we get information about Security Copilot, but the moment we do, we will probably run that as the next session or the session afterwards. But thank you very much for joining me today. And as I say, we had a slightly limited due to the technical difficulties and lots of people being on holiday, but I am going to go and see in the questions and answers if there's questions that's being asked. If anybody's got questions, feel free to ask them. But if not, I'll give everybody about 5 minutes if there's any questions. But hopefully, let me just see. Sorry, I'm going to look sideways. Yep. So there we go. No, nothing so far from a point of view. I'll give it a couple of more minutes. But if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me personally. You're happy to just talk to me. Got my email address. I think my LinkedIn details will be sent out as well. There is a feedback form because we would like to understand which of these sessions are useful to you, What are you finding of interest? But on an ongoing basis, we will be running these sessions continuously. And as I say, don't hesitate to reach out. Drop me an email if you're too shy to ask questions at all. But got an external question come in on LinkedIn. What does it mean if we have CSP provided as a 365 standard license? Does this we need to upgrade? Well, as I say, if you've got the basic CSP Office 365 standard license, you can go and view the basic auditing, but there's very limited capabilities built into it. And there's a good diagram, Nicholas, that I can send you afterwards with the capability of 365 and the different versions. But Office 365 E3 is very, very basic. It's very limited. I don't know how many users you have from on your CSP and your 365 standard, but if you're under 300, I would strongly advise try and look at Business Premium. I'm not saying it's the right fit for your organization. I don't know enough about you. But yes, basically, if you really want to do compliance, if you really want to understand all of that, you will need to be able to upgrade to M365 E3 if you want to put in all of the conditional access, etc., and then decide which parts of compliance you want. So just to expand on that, if you want to do the premium e-discovery, you can go and add that on as a single standalone license if you just want that functionality. But Microsoft's much smarter person than me. They know how to license this to get the most out of it from a point of view. Also, just checking, I think I've got a few questions flying up on the left-hand side, so I apologize while I'm looking left. So Paul has asked, insider risk should scare the heck out of everyone. Is this one thing that's very difficult to defend against? The trade-off between ease of access versus security is difficult to navigate. Absolutely right. Insider risk is probably the one area which we see the biggest. You can create what they call internal firewalls, depending on the information you want to stop people from accessing. But monitoring insider risk is probably one of the areas that is very difficult. It's understanding that behavior. What are we seeing? What risks are we seeing inside the organization? How do I manage these? Who is responsible? So give a good example of insider risk. I hand in my resignation to the HR team. It goes off to Sage. Sage can then notify that into Defender or into my insider risk module that Adrian is leaving. You can then start monitoring for my behavior much more closely while I'm leaving. You will then notice that I suddenly download 50 documents. Maybe that's time for somebody in legal or compliance to come and have a chat to me to understand why am I taking these 50 sensitive documents that's got a lot of private information with me? Or more importantly, why did I have access to all 50? Why was it allowed that I can download it to a personal device? But those are probably some of the big challenges we're seeing. Yes, and I do take it missing. I get the comment here that says all of this is available. The bit that's missing is it's significantly increased cost. Obviously, as I said, it's cost versus risk appetite, and that is probably the biggest challenge I see at the moment is where do I start? Where do I move forward from a point of view? How do I, how much does it cost from a point of view to get all of that information across? How do I protect against this? And what we normally say is try and rethink, how do I reduce my cost? Do I need to use all the applications? So can I adopt a Microsoft first approach? And what's interesting, all of this is behind the cost, but once you start retiring some of the third-party apps that you have, Microsoft has been very clever that you, by retiring, for example, your current antivirus and moving to the Defender for Endpoint, maybe looking at leveraging Defender for Office, etc., you will find that a lot of times this is a cost neutral or enhanced user experience, and you can speak to the team, and the account managers can do license reviews with you to understand how that can become a cost neutral. But at face value, absolutely, £42, £45 for E5. Take a moment, think about it, and I'll be honest, in our group, we've gone to the middle ground with E3 security, and suddenly we're slowly working towards our compliance area more, because we're mapping out those processes, but compliance is very much being undertaken. And we want to ensure that you got to keep secure. And it is that balance between compliance, risk, appetite. And I'm happy to have this conversation in more detail, work with you to understand how you can optimize it. And the good news is, at face value, yes, it sounds expensive, but once you deal with compliance, risk, insurance, etc., the cost is not that astronomical by getting rid of the lot of third-party applications and having that single pane of glass. And Microsoft, if you just go and look at Gartner, is now the leader in a number of these quadrants. And it's taken me a while to convince our group finance director, to make the change. But the benefits, the reduction in risk, the ability to respond to real-time breaches has revolutionized us. And at the end of the day, it is, what is your risk appetite versus cost? And I know budgets aren't unlimited. We do know that. And yes, Microsoft tax, as I call it, I don't call it the Microsoft paywall, I call it the Microsoft tax. You have to pay the tax to get the best out of it. But I'm conscious of time. I want to thank everybody. I don't think any more questions has come in. I'll just double check the Q&A one quick last time. No, I can't see that anything else has come through. So thank you very much for everybody for joining us. Apologies for the people watching it on record. We had difficulty joining us today, but feel free to reach out to me. I believe my LinkedIn details will be posted afterwards, so please feel free. And if you want to email me, it's adrian.becker@softworks.com, and I will do my best to respond quickly to any of your queries.